family. He said, your husband's kindly shown me around the house. He said, and not one of your doors has a lock on. He said, you must be he said, the crime rate must be very low in this area. He said, you haven't even got a lock on the toilet door, though. I said, well, no, and nobody's pinched the bucket yet. And now it's what you've been waiting for. No, not the end. Melody time. First, a small libation. Not because I in any way addicted to drink. Purely medicinal because there's been a flu virus going around and I don't wish in any way to spread the bacteria to your good self, so. Ah, that's nice. Oh. Now, the song I was going to play for you tonight is an adaptation from Mozart. Wonderful. Well done,
In 15 minutes, we're off to Denver for the latest happenings of the Dynasty, and there's bad news in store for Crystal. First on BBC1, the news and sport with Jan Leeming.
Police find what they think could be human bones in the garden of a northwest London house. The Prime Minister talks about life in Europe now if Hitler had had nuclear weapons. And Britain's world title challenger goes down but says he's happy he put up a good fight. Police searching the garden of a house in northwest London have found what they think are human bones. They began digging yesterday, believing there could be 13 bodies buried at the house in Melrose Avenue, Cricklewood. And today, the detective in charge said they'd found what they believed were human bones. A pathologist would be able to say for sure in about a week. Kate Adey reports on the search.
Although nothing was said by the police after yesterday's search, a few small bones were recovered yesterday. And when digging resumed this morning, more were found. The remains were a spade's depth below the surface of the muddy back garden. Nothing has been found in the way of clothing or personal possessions, except for one small button. This afternoon, the man leading the inquiry described how far they'd got.
We are approximately a quarter of the way through the searching of the rear garden. We have found considerable items of bone this morning and this afternoon, and we will continue with the search tomorrow.
Can you say anything about those bones?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not scientifically minded, but I would think that probably one piece is from a hip and a small part of the rib.
It's believed 13 bodies might be buried. So was there any indication so far as to their identity?
No, not at all. No.
And in the past few years, neighbours have known little about the people in the house. Most were young and appeared to stay for only a short while. No one's lived there recently because an unexplained fire damaged the building last year. The only consistent recollection by local residents is of frequent bonfires. So the police have the task of exploring a semi-derelict garden. The work is going slowly, for it appears that the bones are scattered over the whole area of the garden. And although the ground was recently disturbed by the builders who are at work on the house, converting it into flats, it looks as if the remains have been lying buried for at least a year or perhaps longer. The digging begins again tomorrow.
At Highgate Magistrates Court in London, a 37-year-old civil servant, Dennis Andrew Nilsen, was remanded in custody on a charge of murdering a 20-year-old man on or about February the 1st at Muswell Hill in North London. He left court in a police van after a very brief hearing to return to Hornsey Police Station. A report from John Kiddie.
Nilsen had been brought here to Highgate Magistrates Court from Hornsey Police Station early this morning. Shortly before 10 o'clock, he appeared in a packed courtroom handcuffed to a policeman for a hearing which lasted less than a minute. Wearing a black jacket and blue shirt, Dennis Andrew Nilsen looked straight at the magistrate as the charge was read to him. That he did on or about the 1st of February 1983 at 23 Cranley Gardens, London N10, murder Stephen Neil Sinclair. When asked if he understood the charge, Nilsen replied yes. The only detail given about him was his name. He was remanded in custody until next Wednesday. The police say their inquiries haven't yet been completed. As Nilsen was appearing in court, the police were continuing their search at Cranley Gardens. They were concentrating on a piece of waste ground at the back of the house, hardly used except as a rubbish dump. The search here could go on for several days.
Mrs. Thatcher has attacked the Labour Party during another strong attack on the campaign for unilateral nuclear disarmament. She told young Conservatives at Bournemouth that Labour's policy to dismantle the deterrent was disgraceful, and the Prime Minister welcomed the Church of England's recent vote for multilateral disarmament. Our chief political correspondent, Brian Curtois.
Mrs. Thatcher devoted almost all her speech to putting over the government's case in the nuclear debate. Aware of the need to convince young voters, she said it wasn't surprising that many of them were so fearful about the horror of the nuclear bomb. She used the arrest of the Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie and the horrors that French people were now reliving 50 years after Hitler came to power to attack what she called one of the myths of unilateral disarmament.
If in the 1930s nuclear weapons had been invented and the Allies had been faced with Nazi SS-20s and backfire bombers, would it then have been morally right to have handed to Hitler total control of the most terrible weapons which man has ever made? Would not that have been the one way to ensure that the 1,000-year Reich became exactly that? Would not unilateralism have given to Hitler the world domination he sought? Ladies and gentlemen, had we done that, that would have been the beginning of a new dark age, and we should not be here debating today.
Unilateralism, Mrs. Thatcher declared, would make war more likely, and all arguments against it would be deployed at the next election. No clue about the election date. It'll be this year or next year, Mrs. Thatcher teased, before receiving a rapturous foot-stamping reception from the young Conservatives.
In London, more than 1,000 student supporters of CND staged a protest against government spending on arms. They formed a human chain which crossed Westminster Bridge, linking the Ministry of Defence and the Education Department. Then a giant cheque was passed along for about a mile before being delivered at the Education Department. The idea was to argue that money should be diverted from military use towards education and social welfare. The Labour Party leader, Michael Foot, has said there's little hope for anyone except the very rich in next month's budget. At a rally at Southampton, Mr. Foot said if even the government's most extravagant promises were realised, most people would get back only a third of what the Tories had taken away in the last 4 budgets. In Israel, some 2,000 peace campaigners marched in torchlit procession through Tel Aviv this evening. They were voicing noisy opposition to Prime Minister Begin and his response to the inquiry into the massacre of refugees in Beirut. Keith Graves watched the demonstration.
It was not the numbers that were significant, but the message, that Israelis should parade through the streets accusing their leader of being a fascist murderer and demanding Begin go home, was yet another sign of the deep divisions within Israeli society over the war in Lebanon and the government's handling of the massacre inquiry report. Political activity has been suspended for the past 24 hours for the Jewish Sabbath, but tomorrow the cabinet meets again. Mr. Sharon has resigned as Defence Minister, but rumour has it he will remain in the Cabinet with responsibility for the occupied West Bank area, which is adding to the controversy. Like pouring petrol onto a fire was one observation. Yet Israelis are drawing comfort from one aspect of scenes like this. They prove how strong is democracy here. Demonstrations like this would, one marcher pointed out, have been put down ruthlessly in any other Middle East country.
Prince Charles has been speaking about last week's work as a labourer on a Dartmoor farm. It was all go, he said. Being down here has restored my sanity in the sense that there's nothing better than getting closer to natural things and animals, and getting one's backside kicked and being told to get on with it. One of the photographs to be published in the Mail on Sunday tomorrow shows an unshaven prince in with the cows. He said, "I got to know them all by their udders." Norwich Cathedral was the scene of a memorial service for Colin Chapman, founder of Lotus Cars. His wife Hazel was joined by Jackie Stewart and other familiar motor racing figures, including Sterling Moss. 600 people paid tribute to the man who made the name Lotus world famous. Ice and snow put off half today's league football matches and all but one race meeting in Britain. But one British sportsman tonight is $500,000 richer, and he thinks he put up a good fight to get it. David Cass reports.
Tony Sibson, the British challenger for the World Middleweight Boxing Championship, was well beaten by the reigning champion Marvin Hagler at Worcester, Massachusetts. But he says he still thinks he fought well and bravely. Sibson said he'd been well licked by a master boxer.
Well, Simpson's winning friends here for the courage he's showing here in standing toe-to-toe with Hagler. But he's caught the first knockdown, and Simpson's cut and hurt. The sixth. And that cut's looking much, much worse, and the end may well be very close.
The referee stopped the fight later, but Sibson wasn't downhearted.
I'm feeling happy. I'm not crying or anything. I got well licked by a master in the ring. You know, I fought top fighters. And, you know, I've broke down their defence, not by getting caught like I got caught tonight, by good tactical boxing and boxing ability, what got me to #1 in the world, and beating great champions. But tonight, I just couldn't find a way through to Marvin Hagler. I started off slow, which I always do, and I just couldn't find my way in.
The man's reach, you see, it's long, isn't it?
Yeah, very deceiving, because I said to him at the weigh-in, "You're not so big as I thought you were." But I wasn't looking at his arms.
And you can see the fight at 10 to 11 on BBC1. Ice and snow prevented half today's football, but Anfield was playable and Kenny Dalglish scored the goal which gave Liverpool victory over Ipswich and a 15-point lead at the top of the First Division. Billy Livingston came on as substitute for Wolves in their game against Carlisle and got the winner in the last few minutes to stretch Wolves' lead at the top of the Second Division to 4 points. Huddersfield moved back into the Third Division promotion race with a 5-1 victory over Millwall. Russell got their second goal.
Martin. Sutton. Willis. Stanton is the player making the run. What a lovely pass. Russell's in the middle, and that's 2.
In Scotland, Eric Black's hat-trick gave Aberdeen a 3-1 win over Celtic. The win meant Aberdeen moved ahead of Celtic at the top of the Premier Division. Two famous Rugby League Cup sides, Widnes and Leeds, met in today's first-round State Express Challenge Cup tie. Leeds went through by 12 points to 6, and it's the first time in 12 years that Widnes, in white, have been beaten at home in the competition.
Oh, an interception from Conway. Now then, can he go full length of that field? And he does do so. Well, what a great try. Oh, and a well-held ball from Brian Hogan. Oh, and a brilliant movement, and what a try! David Ward, Conway, weaving, dodging. Oh, and he's still going, this lad. Oh, but well taken by Mick Burke. 1 minute to go, 6th tackle coming up. He's going for a try! Yes, he's over!
Sebastian Coe showed he's back in form for this season's Athletics World Cup with a brilliant run on his first appearance of the year. In the indoor match with France, Coe showed an explosive finishing burst to overtake Didier Bergouin in the 1500 metres.
A lap and a half to go, and this is beginning to burn away from the rest of the field. A gap has opened up. Stuart Payton can't stay with that pace, and Bergouin has gone away. 3:02.8, and this has made a fine race of it, and it's going to stretch and it's going to test, and that's good. And that's what Sebastian Coe wanted. The bell has gone, and Sebastian Coe unleashes a break. The crowd are rising. That's the Coe of old. That is what they came to see, the majesty of the man. And suddenly, an enormous gap has grown. 7 metres, and the Frenchman is flailing. And there is only one winner, and he's running superbly. No question about it. 7 metres has grown to 20 metres in 1 lap of 200 metres. And Sebastian Coe is back to winning ways and looked quite magnificent.
The West Indies cricket rebels play the last match of their South African tour tomorrow. They've won some of the games played against a South African team, and for the South African cricketing authorities, the tour has been a success. Philip Hayton reports.
The West Indian players are now heroes in South Africa. Star players are household names. They're feted and celebrated wherever they go. There's even reggae music to help them warm up. They might have cost more than £60,000 a player to entice here, but cricket fans reckon they're worth every rand. Lawrence Rowe and his team have endeared themselves on and off the field. They've been charming and polite, with hardly a bad word for the country and its racial policies.
I don't believe that.
It's after this weekend's last match when the West Indians might lose some of their cheerful confidence. Back home, they face a lifetime ban from Test cricket and hostility from many fellow countrymen who regard them as Krugerrand mercenaries. Top-class cricket in South Africa is multiracial, on the field and in the stands, although there's only one black player and not many black spectators. Even so, the mixed stands are a rare and encouraging sight in a country beset by racial tensions. Supporters of the tour say it's done much to break down racial prejudice, but opponents argue that it puts a false seal of respectability on a very imperfect society. Strangely enough, both views could be right.
That's all the news from me on One. Good night.
Good evening to you. There are a couple of subtle changes taking place at the moment. First of all, this warm front has introduced somewhat milder weather into Scotland and Northern Ireland, but to counter that, now that the winds are going back more to the east or even southeast, it looks as if southern parts are becoming colder. So the detail on tonight, first of all, and certainly a cold night as far as England and Wales is concerned, a widespread, quite sharp frost. There's a good deal of cloud around at the moment as well, and some snow scattered around, but I think as the night goes on, at least most of the snow in the more central parts of England will die away, and at the end of the night you'll be left with snow showers near to the east coast and in the Channel Islands. Over Scotland and Northern Ireland it is milder, and I think by and large it'll be a frost-free night, but a pretty misty, murky one, and a dampish one as well, with a little drizzle scattered around, although that too probably tending to die away as the night goes on. Tomorrow the same sort of split. That means to say Scotland and Northern Ireland will have a milder day than of late. Temperatures around about the normal for the time of year, 5 to 7 degrees centigrade. That means into the low 40s Fahrenheit. Most places dry, but a fair amount of cloud around, but some breaks every now and again, especially in the east of Scotland, to give you some sunny intervals. Dry too, I think, for the most part over England and Wales, but certainly much colder there, in fact colder, if anything, than today in the southeast, with maybe a few light snow showers.
Highlights for Sunday evening on BBC1. At 7:15, Compo, Clegg and Foggy cause havoc when they visit a health camp.
Here you are, get your up pies, mushy peas, biscuit. Let's have your money, put your money on the drain.
At 7:45, Nanny receives a letter from Sam asking her to come and meet him.
Next Wednesday in London, it might as well be Baghdad. I mean, how can I get away?
You can get away, Nanny. Of course you can. You must.
At 8:40, Mastermind returns to Loughborough University of Technology to face Chairman Magnus Magnusson. At 9:10, Jim Bergerac investigates the death of a stuntman.
Here he is, beginning his descent into Ryan and Hopper plane, ruins it.
Hold it. And that was the last you saw of the hang glider, was it?
Omnibus at 10:15 talks to Melina Mercouri, film star and Greek Minister of Culture, about the famous Elgin marbles and her demands for their return to Greece. Highlights for Sunday evening on BBC1.
In 45 minutes, Terry Wogan will be engaging in animated conversation with authors Alan Bleasdale and Dick Francis and comedian Freddie Starr.